The February wind carved down from the Colorado Rockies like a blade, scattering pale snow across the narrow mountain road where Garrett Ashford's Ford F-150 labored against the incline. His knuckles had gone white on the steering wheel hours ago, the skin stretched tight over bone as he navigated ruts deep enough to swallow a tire. At 47, he carried the bearing of a man sculpted by 2 decades of homicide investigations, square jaw marked with faint scars from altercations that never made official reports, dark stubble threaded with premature gray eyes that oscillated between hypervigilance and a bone-deep exhaustion no amount of sleep could cure. The truck groaned as it climbed higher, each protest from the worn suspension sending tremors through the frame. Garrett had been a Denver police detective for 22 years, the kind of investigator other cops respected but rarely approached outside the precinct. His broad shoulders and muscular build still suggested capability, yet his posture now sagged under an invisible weight, the specific gravity of a husband who had buried his wife last June and still couldn't accept the word accident. Beside him, 10-year-old Ivy Ashford sat motionless against the fogged passenger window. Her delicate frame seemed to have contracted since Claire's funeral, as if grief itself were physically compressing her. Long brown hair fell unkempt around pale cheeks that had lost the flush of childhood. Blue eyes that once sparked with mischief now held only a dull flatness, fixed on the endless white landscape scrolling past, but seeing nothing. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit against her chest, its ears frayed fabric patched in 2 places where love had literally worn it thin. Since the highway patrol officer had appeared at their door last June, with his hat in his hands, Ivy hadn't spoken a single word. Garrett glanced at her every few seconds, searching for some flicker of the daughter he'd known before. The therapist had used careful clinical language: selective mutism trauma response, protective dissociation. Translation: his little girl had retreated so far inside herself that she might never find the way back. The suggestion had been environment change, something drastic enough to jar her loose from the prison of silence. But this driving toward a $5 cabin in the middle of February wilderness, even Garrett questioned whether desperation had finally curdled into stupidity. The memory of his colleague's reaction still burned hot. 3 weeks ago in the precinct break room, Detective Vaughn Sterling had leaned against the doorframe with that trademark smirk playing across his thin lips, coffee mug raised like he was proposing a toast to Garrett's misfortune. $5, Ashford, that's pathetic even for a grieving widower. The laughter that rippled through the room had followed Garrett down the hallway and apparently all the way into these mountains. Sterling had his partner for 6 years before the reassignment, had always possessed a talent for finding the softest part of a man's pride and pressing down until something ruptured. But Sterling didn't know what Garrett had discovered. None of them did. Because 3 days after Claire's funeral, while sorting through her photography equipment, Garrett had found the photograph wedged inside a camera bag she rarely used. The image showed this exact cabin log construction, sagging roofline, surrounded by pines, and on the back in Claire's elegant handwriting, GPS coordinates circled twice in red ink. Below that, a partial sentence dated April, 2 months before her death. If something happens to me, G, the rest torn away as if she'd changed her mind mid-warning. The cabin materialized suddenly as the trees parted, exactly matching the photograph down to the specific angle of structural decay. It squatted in a small clearing, half buried under snow, that had drifted against its north wall. The realtor's description had been generous to the point of fiction. This wasn't a fixer-upper. It was a relic one bad winter away from total collapse. The roof sagged under accumulated weight shingles, missing in patches that would guarantee leaks. Windows clouded with years of dust reflected nothing but gray sky. The chimney showed a vertical crack wide enough to see daylight through. Garrett cut the engine and let silence settle like another layer of snow. The air smelled of pine resin and cold stone, that particular clarity that comes with high altitude in winter. Ivy hugged her rabbit tighter, her breath visible in the rapidly cooling interior. He tried to inject enthusiasm into his voice, knowing it rang hollow. "This is it, kiddo. $5 and a signature. Not much, but it's ours." The words floated unanswered in the frozen air between them. He swallowed hard and tried again. "Your mom used to dream about places like this. She always said cabins held memories better than city walls." For one heartbeat, Ivy's eyes shifted toward him, some deep recognition stirring, but then she looked away and pushed open her door. The snow crunched under Garrett's boots as he approached the entrance. The front door had swollen in its frame from years of mountain moisture wood grain splitting along stress lines. The key, small and corroded, barely worth the metal it took to forge it, turned with resistance that suggested it might snap. The door scraped open on hinges that shrieked protest, revealing an interior that smelled of damp earth and decades of abandonment. Dust motes swirled in the weak light filtering through cracked window panes. A sagging sofa leaned drunkenly in one corner, its upholstery split to expose yellowed stuffing. Shelves lined one wall, populated by mismatched mugs and the kind of detritus people leave behind when they stop carrying a rusted can opener, water-stained paperbacks, with covers curled back, a cracked ceramic ashtray. The wood stove sat cold and silent at the room's center, its door hanging slightly ajar. The floorboards groaned under Garrett's weight as he crossed to check the hearth, already mentally cataloging repairs that would cost far more than $5. His detective's eye caught it immediately, the dark streaks on the floor near the back wall. Not the kind of staining water damage produced, but something else. He knelt and touched one fingertip to the discoloration. The texture was wrong for dirt, wrong for rust. He'd spent 20 years working homicide. He knew dried blood when he saw it, knew how it oxidized to that particular rust brown, knew the way it soaked into porous surfaces and refused to wash completely clean. These stains were months old, maybe longer, but they formed a deliberate trail leading toward a gap where the floorboards didn't quite meet the wall. Garrett's pulse kicked up a notch, old training taking over. He studied the pattern more carefully. Not random splatter, but a progression as if something bleeding had moved with purpose. Following the trail, he found paw prints pressed deep into the dust. Large canine, the stride uneven, one rear leg dragging slightly. Ivy's voice startled him so badly he nearly lost his balance. Daddy, look. The words were barely more than a whisper, but after 8 months of silence, they hit him with the force of a shout. He spun towards her, heart hammering, and saw her small finger pointing down at the gap near the baseboard. He moved closer, listening. At first, only the mountain wind threading through cracks in the walls, but then faint but unmistakable the sound of claws scraping wood. A deliberate dragging sound, too controlled to be branches or wind-blown debris. Garrett's hand moved instinctively toward his hip muscle memory, reaching for a service weapon that wasn't there. He'd left it locked in the truck's gun safe, old reflexes dying hard. Instead, he grabbed a rusted iron poker leaning against the stove, testing its weight. The metal felt flimsy, barely adequate, but it was better than nothing. He pressed his ear close to the floor. The scratching came again, closer this time, accompanied by a faint whimper that raised every hair on the back of his neck. Something was alive beneath their feet. Something that had bled its way into this forgotten cabin and taken shelter in the crawlspace. Garrett forced his voice steady for Ivy's sake. It's probably just an animal. Maybe raccoons. But his tone lacked conviction. 22 years of police work had taught him to trust unease, to recognize when a situation carried weight beyond its surface appearance. The sound came again, claws dragging closer, deliberate, as though whatever was down there was waiting, listening back. Ivy's small face pressed against his sleeve, pale as the snow outside, her blue eyes locked on the dark gap in the boards. She whispered again, softer than wind, "It's still there." The sound approached, deliberate and patient, and Garrett felt the hair on his arms prickle with awareness that something fundamental had shifted the moment they crossed this threshold. Whatever waited below had been here when Claire photographed this place last spring. Whatever Claire had discovered, whatever she'd been trying to tell him through coordinates and torn warnings, it started right here in this gap where floorboards failed to meet and something wounded had found sanctuary. He forced himself to move, to slide fingers under the edge of the loose board and pull. The wood resisted, swollen with moisture, then gave way with a crack that sent splinters flying. A gust of stale air rushed up from the hollow beneath the cabin, carrying scents of earth and animal musk and old copper. Garrett braced for rats or possums, some mundane explanation for the blood and the sounds. What met his eyes stopped him cold. Curled in the shadows lay a German shepherd, her fur matted with dried blood and grime ribs showing through a frame that spoke of weeks without adequate food. She tried to lift her head but fell back with a weak whimper. Amber eyes cloudy with exhaustion, yet still razor-sharp with intelligence, fixed on Garrett, with an expression that seemed to be assessing, calculating, deciding. Beside her, nestled against her trembling body, were 3 tiny puppies, eyes barely open, coats soft and patchy, squirming blindly for warmth and milk their mother could barely provide. Garrett's breath caught. 2 decades of facing down armed suspects and crime scenes that turned his stomach, and it was the sight of this broken animal and her helpless young that cracked something in his chest. He leaned closer, the poker clattering forgotten to the floor. The shepherd bared her teeth at first, a warning growl rising from deep in her throat despite her obvious weakness. He recognized that defiance, the refusal to yield, even when strength had drained to nothing. It reminded him of officers he'd served alongside who fought through bullet wounds simply because surrender wasn't in their vocabulary. Easy, girl. The words came out low and steady, the same tone he'd used with traumatized witnesses and shell-shocked victims. His eyes scanned her injuries with professional detachment, even as his gut twisted with sympathy. One hind leg swollen, the joint angled, wrong fracture weeks old, never properly set. A jagged scar across her ear, where something had torn through flesh. Deep scratches along her flank, some infected, weeping clear fluid. This wasn't a wild animal. Her build, the intelligence in those amber eyes, the faded remnants of a collar mark rubbed into her neck fur. She had belonged to someone, been trained by someone. And then something had gone catastrophically wrong. Behind him, Ivy stepped closer, stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Her blue eyes widened, but not with fear. Something else flickered across her face, recognition perhaps, or the shadow of a memory she couldn't quite grasp. Her lips parted, and Garrett held his breath, afraid that if he moved or spoke, he might shatter whatever fragile moment was forming. Then she whispered, clear and certain, Ghost. The name fell into the cold cabin air with the weight of revelation. Garrett froze, turning slowly to face his daughter. She was staring at the German shepherd with trembling hands, then knelt despite his warning glance. Ivy, wait. She's hurt. She might bite. But Ivy shook her head, some knowledge he didn't possess guiding her movements. She reached out, one small hand, palm open, fingers extended. The shepherd sniffed her skin, the growl fading into an uncertain rumble. And then, as Ivy's fingers brushed the matted fur, the dog's body seemed to sink, tension easing, as though she understood something Garrett could not. Ghost. Ivy whispered it again, firmer this time, and the name seemed to settle in the cabin like an unspoken contract. Garrett's throat tightened. Hearing his daughter's voice again, clear and purposeful, after 8 months of hollow silence, was like watching sunrise break through weeks of storm. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his emotions in check, trying to be the steady presence she needed even as his world tilted on its axis. Determined to act before the moment slipped away, Garrett widened the gap between floorboards and crouched down. We need to get her out of there. She won't survive long in this condition. He gently slid his arms beneath the weakened animal, feeling her ribs press against his forearms through matted fur. She whimpered but didn't resist, as if some part of her recognized rescue when it arrived. Her puppies cried out until Ivy scooped them carefully into her coat, holding them close to her chest, where her body heat could keep them from shock. The shepherd was heavier than she looked, muscle still present beneath the starvation. Garrett carried her to the hearth and laid her on a folded emergency blanket from the truck. He moved with the same controlled precision he'd used countless times at crime scenes, hands, steady breathing, even mind cataloging details and prioritizing actions. His training returned without conscious thought. Check the wounds clean, the blood apply pressure where infection threatened. He tore strips from an old flannel shirt in his bag and bound her injured leg as best he could, knowing it was makeshift, but better than leaving her to die beneath the floorboards. The puppies squirmed against Ivy, tiny whines filling the silence. She looked down at them with something close to wonder, pale cheeks flushing with color he hadn't seen in months. She held one up carefully, a patchy mix of black and tan eyes, still milky with infancy, and a small smile tugged at her lips. Tentative, fragile, but real. Garrett watched, chest heavy with emotions he couldn't name. It had been so long since he'd seen that expression. He realized then that these animals had already begun to heal something in his daughter that therapy and time hadn't been able to reach. The hours stretched into evening as he tended the shepherd Ivy had named Ghost. His daughter fetched bowls of water and scraps of food from their supplies, moving with initiative instead of waiting for instruction. The cabin, once empty and oppressive, now pulsed with the fragile sounds of survival, shallow breathing, soft whimpers, the rustle of puppies seeking milk. Yet Garrett remained on edge. His detective's instincts wouldn't settle. The questions circled like wolves. How had this dog ended up here beneath their floorboards? Why so wounded? Why abandoned? And why did she carry scars that looked more like battles than accidents, as dusk painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold? Garrett sat on the edge of the sofa staring at Ghost, where she rested near the makeshift hearth. She slept fitfully, body twitching, as if haunted by memories her canine mind couldn't process. He could see himself in her scarred carrying pain, refusing to surrender because someone depended on survival. Ivy had fallen asleep, curled against the sofa arm, the puppies bundled in her coat, tiny bodies pressed against her warmth. For the first time in months, she looked peaceful. Garrett's hand trembled as he reached to brush a strand of hair from her forehead. He whispered so softly it was almost nothing. Thank you, Ghost, for giving her back a piece of herself. The cabin groaned as wind pushed against the walls, but inside something had shifted. A fragile thread now connected them, drawn not from wood or stone, but from the arrival of this wounded creature and her helpless young. The silence that had haunted their lives since Claire's death was broken, replaced by soft sounds of breathing and whimpers and a child's whispered name. As Garrett closed his tired eyes, he realized the house he'd bought for $5 might hold more than dust and ruin. It might hold the beginning of something worth fighting for again. But exhaustion dragged him under before he could pursue that thought to its conclusion. The temperature dropped sharply once the sun disappeared behind the western peaks. Garrett woke stiff and disoriented, back aching from the uneven sofa cushions. He blinked at the strange shadows, momentarily forgetting where he was, until the events of the day reassembled themselves. The cabin, the blood trail, Ghost and her puppies. Ivy still slept soundly beside him, one small hand resting atop the smallest puppy, as if she'd never known anything safer. Garrett stood quietly, careful not to wake her, and checked on Ghost. The shepherd lay near the cold stove chest, rising shallowly but with more steadiness than before. Her puppies curled against her, nursing with the desperate single-mindedness of infants. He built a small fire using kindling from a stack near the stove that was miraculously dry, and soon the space filled with flickering warmth. As the fire took hold, Garrett examined Ghost more carefully in the improved light. His detective's eye caught details he'd missed in the initial chaos. On her right ear, beneath the scarred flesh, he could make out the faint remnants of a tattoo, numbers or letters that someone had deliberately removed using chemicals or fire. The skin was puckered and discolored, the pattern barely visible, but enough remained to confirm what his instincts already suspected. Military or police canine, someone had tried to make untraceable. They'd wanted to erase her identity, eliminate any connection to her official service record. "You witnessed something, didn't you?" he murmured to the sleeping dog. "Something that made you too dangerous to let live." Ghost's ear twitched at the sound of his voice, but she didn't wake. Garrett's mind spun through possibilities, each darker than the last. A working dog, highly trained, deliberately maimed and abandoned in a remote cabin. Claire's photograph with coordinates dated 2 months before her death. The torn warning. Everything pointed toward a connection he couldn't yet see clearly, but which pulsed beneath the surface like a heartbeat. At 9 o'clock, Ghost's head suddenly lifted, ears forward, amber eyes alert. A low growl built in her chest, not the weak warning from earlier, but something deeper, more urgent. Garrett was on his feet instantly, every nerve firing. He moved to Ivy's hand, covering her mouth gently as she woke. "Stay quiet. Behind me. Now." She obeyed without question, sliding behind him as he positioned himself between her and the door, iron poker back in his grip. Heavy footsteps crunched through snow outside, deliberate and unhurried. Someone knew they were here. Someone had been watching, waiting for darkness. 3 loud knocks rattled the door in its frame, the sound too aggressive to be friendly. Garrett tightened his grip on the poker and approached, cracking the door just wide enough to see who stood on the other side. The man before him was tall and gaunt, perhaps mid-50s, with a face weathered by elements and hardship. His beard, more gray than black, hung unkempt over a threadbare coat that had seen better decades. His eyes, though, were sharp and assessing, moving past Garrett into the cabin's interior before snapping back. "I wasn't sure anyone would be fool enough to stay here." The voice came out gravel rough, abraded by cigarettes and mountain cold. His gaze drifted past Garrett to where Ivy knelt with Ghost. "This place ain't yours to take." Garrett tightened his grip on the poker. "Who are you? What do you want?" The stranger's eyes narrowed, calculating. He looked around quickly, then leaned closer. The smell of stale tobacco clinging to him. "I'll give you one warning, officer." The way he spat the word made it clear he somehow knew Garrett's background, knew things he shouldn't. "You shouldn't be here. This cabin's history isn't clean. Walk away before it swallows you too." Ghost lunged forward, suddenly snapping her jaws with such force the stranger stumbled backward off the porch. Her growl thundered in the night air, primal and protective despite her injuries. Garrett used the moment to press forward, swinging the poker just enough to force the man to retreat further into the snow. The stranger cursed, hand moving to his waist where Garrett glimpsed the handle of a hunting knife. But he hesitated when Ghost snarled again, teeth gleaming in the moonlight. For a long moment they stood frozen. Garrett with shoulders squared and eyes hard, the stranger with wild, shifting eyes that betrayed both desperation and menace. Then with a bitter laugh, the man backed away into the snow, boots crunching as he moved toward the tree line. "Stay if you want, but don't say you weren't warned. This place eats men alive." The darkness between pines swallowed him, leaving only the hiss of wind carrying his words like a chill deeper than cold. Garrett closed the door firmly and threw the bolt. His chest heaved, but he forced his voice steady for Ivy's sake. She stared at him, clutching one of the puppies so tightly he thought she might crush it. "It's okay. You're safe. Ghost won't let anyone near us." Ghost stood rigid at the door, ears, twitching eyes fixed on the woods, as though she could still see the man retreating. Garrett knelt beside her, running a hand along her scarred flank. Good girl. She'd sensed the stranger before Garrett had heard anything, and if not for her alarm, the man might have made it inside unnoticed. The cabin felt different now, no longer just a fragile refuge from grief, but a place marked by something hidden and dangerous. Garrett leaned back against the wall, staring at cracks in the ceiling, Beam's thoughts heavy. The man's words echoed. This cabin's history isn't clean. He had thought $5 bought him peace, bought him a chance to help Ivy heal somewhere far from memories of Claire. But now he wondered what kind of secrets came with that price. What had Claire known? Why had she hidden these coordinates last spring, prepared this warning 2 months before June's highway crash? And who was that man appearing out of February wilderness to issue cryptic threats? That night, long after Ivy had drifted back to sleep with the puppy nestled beside her, Garrett sat awake by the dying fire. He turned the lantern low, listening to the wind howl, every creak of the walls magnified in the darkness. Ghost lay near the door, eyes open, gaze unblinking. Together, man and dog kept vigil against whatever had suddenly grown far more real in the mountain night. Sleep came in fragments, if at all. Each time Garrett's eyes closed, his mind conjured Claire's face, not as she'd been in the hospital those final hours, machines keeping her technically alive until he could say goodbye, but vibrant and whole the way she'd looked that last breakfast together in early June. She'd seemed distracted, distant. He'd asked if everything was all right. She'd smiled and lied. Just thinking about a project, nothing important. He should have pushed harder. He should have known his wife well enough to recognize when she was carrying weight too heavy to bear alone. The torn photograph occupied his thoughts like a splinter working deeper into flesh. If something happens to me, what had she been trying to tell him in April? What threat had she anticipated that would materialize 2 months later on that rain-slick highway? And how did it connect to this cabin, to Ghost, to a stranger who knew Garrett was a cop without being told? As gray dawn light began seeping through the cracked windows, Garrett made a decision. The nearest town was Pine Ridge, population maybe 245 minutes down the mountain if the road stayed passable. Someone there would know, the cabin's history would remember who'd owned it before the foreclosure that let Garrett buy it for $5. Small towns kept their secrets in plain sight. You just had to know which old-timer to ask and which questions would loosen tongues. He woke Ivy gently. Sweetheart, we're going into town today. Need to get some supplies, maybe find someone who knows about this place. She looked up at him with those 2 old eyes, then nodded. Her voice came out scratchy from disuse but determined. What about Ghost? Can she come? Garrett shook his head. Too risky. If people see her, start asking questions, we don't know who we can trust yet. Ivy's face fell, but she understood. After last night, she understood more than any 10-year-old should have to. They left Ghost and the 3 puppies secured in the cabin with enough food and water to last the day. Garrett reinforced the door as best he could and left the poker within easy reach, though he doubted the shepherd needed weapons beyond her teeth. As they pulled away in the Ford, he watched the cabin shrink in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see smoke or worse. But it just sat there, sagging, impatient, keeping its secrets for a few hours longer. The drive to Pine Ridge took them down switchbacks that made Garrett's hands ache from gripping the wheel. Ice had formed overnight, turning the dirt road treacherous. Twice they nearly slid into drainage ditches deep enough to trap the truck until spring thaw. But eventually the road widened and civilization such as it was appeared. Pine Ridge consisted of one main street lined with buildings that looked like they'd been standing since Colorado achieved statehood. A general store anchored the north end, its weathered sign promising groceries, hardware, and ammunition. A post office that doubled as town hall sat across from a small medical clinic. A diner with smoke curling from its chimney occupied the south end. Perhaps a dozen other businesses filled the gap's feed store, mechanic, real estate office with dusty windows. A handful of trucks sat parked at angles that suggested their owners had been inside drinking coffee since before dawn. Garrett parked in front of the general store, his Denver plates immediately conspicuous among the mud-splattered local vehicles. He could feel eyes tracking them as he helped Ivy out, her small hand clutching his with a grip that spoke of anxiety. Stay close to me. We're just here to buy supplies and ask some friendly questions. The bell above the door announced their entrance with a cheerful jingle that felt at odds with the tension coiling in Garrett's gut. A few locals browsed the aisles, all of them turning to stare with the undisguised curiosity of people who knew everyone in town and recognized outsiders instantly. Behind the counter stood a woman who commanded immediate attention, despite her age or perhaps because of it. Eleanor Thorne looked every year of her 83 winters, but her bearing suggested she'd outlasted them through sheer force of will. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun framed a face mapped with lines that spoke of harsh weather and hard-won wisdom. Her hands spotted with age but steady organized receipts with methodical precision. When she looked up and her gaze met Garrett's, something flickered in her expression. Recognition, perhaps? Or confirmation of a long-held suspicion. "You must be the fool who bought the Miller cabin for $5. Her voice cracked like bark on ancient trees but carried clearly across the store. Garrett tensed hand instinctively moving toward where his weapon would be if he were on duty, news travels, fast. Eleanor's mouth curved in something that might have been a smile on a warmer-faced small town. "We don't get many outsiders in February." Her gaze moved to Ivy, softening almost imperceptibly at the sight of the child, then narrowing as she noticed the small nose peeking from beneath Ivy's coat. One of the puppies, Ranger the boldest, had managed to wriggle his head free. Eleanor's breath caught audibly, her weathered hand flying to her throat where a silver pendant gleamed. "That's one of Ghost's puppies." The statement hung in the air, loaded with implications Garrett didn't yet understand. His muscles coiled, ready to grab Ivy and retreat, but Eleanor raised both hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy, officer. I'm not your enemy. Claire was my friend." The sound of his wife's name in this stranger's mouth hit Garrett like a physical blow. Eleanor's eyes held his, intelligent and knowing. She said someone would come eventually. Didn't expect her husband and daughter. She moved with surprising speed for her age, crossing to the door and flipping the sign to read family emergency. The few customers exchanged glances, but shuffled out without complaint, clearly accustomed to Eleanor's authority in her own establishment. Once the last patron departed, she locked the door and gestured toward the back. "Come with me. Quickly. We don't have much time." Eleanor's studio occupied the space behind the general store, like a secret kept in plain sight. Canvases leaned against every available wall surface, creating a gallery that documented decades of mountain life through the eyes of someone who understood light and shadow with uncommon precision. Garrett's attention snagged immediately on the works dominating the far wall, dozens of paintings featuring the same German shepherd, rendered in oils, watercolors, charcoal studies. Ghost standing guard at a moonlit cabin. Ghost with puppies, barely visible in the shadows. Ghost beside a man in marine dress uniform, the subject's face turned away, but his bearing unmistakably military. "Your wife painted most of these last spring." Eleanor moved through the space with the confidence of someone who'd arranged it herself years ago and knew every object by touch. She was talented with a camera, but wanted to learn traditional methods. "I taught her. We became close." Ivy stared at the canvases with wonder and something deeper, the recognition of her mother's work in a context she'd never imagined. Garrett felt the floor tilt beneath him. Claire here in this mountain town spending afternoons painting dogs and landscapes while he'd believed she was volunteering at the animal shelter in Denver. The geometry of deception was beginning to take shape. Claire started at Pine Valley Veterans Center 18 months ago. Eleanor crossed to a painting of wildflowers, lifting it carefully from its hook to reveal a wall safe behind. Photography for their grant applications, therapy session, documentation. Smart woman, observant. She noticed things others missed: dogs disappearing from the program, veterans leaving suddenly against medical advice. She started asking questions that made certain people uncomfortable. The safe opened with a series of clicks that seemed too loud in the confined space. Eleanor withdrew a USB drive, standard black plastic that could have come from any electronics store, but the weight with which she handled it suggested otherwise. "Claire gave me this 3 days before she died. Made me promise that if anything happened, I'd give it only to federal authorities. But when the accident report came through Denver PD so fast, so clean, after everything she told me about corrupt officers, I couldn't trust anyone." Her weathered hand extended the drive toward Garrett. Until now, he took at the small device, feeling heavier than physics allowed. Claire's handwriting on the label read simply, "Truth." Eleanor provided a laptop from beneath a cluttered desk, booting it with the slow deliberation of someone who'd learned technology late but mastered it through necessity. Garrett inserted the drive, AB pressed close against his side, both of them holding breath they didn't realize they were keeping. The directory structure revealed Claire's methodical mind. Folders organized by date and type, photographs, audio recordings, financial documents, personnel files, video. Garrett opened photographs first, and the screen filled with thumbnails that told a story in frozen moments. Denver PD Captain Malcolm Cross meeting Pine Valley staff in underground parking garages. Detective Vaughn Sterling, Garrett's former partner, the man who'd mocked him in the break room, unloading unmarked boxes at the facility's loading dock at 2 in the morning. Veterans and work crews loading panel trucks with cargo that didn't match any official supply manifests. Therapy dogs being trained with what looked like drug samples, their handlers running drills that had nothing to do with PTSD treatment. Garrett's hands trembled on the keyboard. 6 years partnered with Sterling, riding together through Denver's worst neighborhoods, backing each other in situations where hesitation meant death. And all that time, Vaughn had been running product for Cross using his badge to protect a distribution network that exploited the very veterans the VA system was supposed to help. The betrayal burned hotter than anger. It was personal in ways that made his vision narrow and pulse hammer in his temples. The audio folder contained dozens of recordings, each time-stamped and labeled with initials Garrett assumed corresponded to speakers. He clicked one labeled MCVS042524. Captain Cross's voice emerged from the laptop speakers with crystal clarity. The vets are perfect for this. Already trained, disciplined, loyal. Most of them damaged enough psychologically that they won't question orders if we frame it right. Vaughn Sterling's voice responded with the casual indifference of someone discussing livestock and the dog program's genius. Better than any electronic security system. They can detect rival product at concentrations our equipment would miss. An unknown third voice interjected. Older and rougher Webb is asking too many questions about training protocols. Getting suspicious about what we're actually teaching the dogs. Cross's reply came cold and final. Then we handle the Webb situation permanently. Make it look like a training accident. The canine too, she's witnessed too much, knows too many voices. Both of them need to disappear clean. Garrett stopped the playback, nausea rising in his throat. This wasn't just corruption. It was systematic, calculated reaching from street-level distribution all the way up through department leadership. The financial documents folder revealed money laundering through Pine Valley's operational budget, veteran names matched to distribution territories. Dog training protocols deliberately altered to teach drug detection instead of PTSD support. And they're buried in a subfolder marked urgent, an internal memo dated 14 months prior. Subject elimination of M-Web and K9 asset. Authorization MC, execution VS. But it was the video folder that broke something fundamental in Garrett's chest. A single file labeled simply for Garrett. He hesitated, finger hovering over the trackpad, afraid of what came next, but unable to stop. Ivy's small hand found his. It's okay, Daddy. We need to see. He clicked. Claire appeared on screen, seated in this very studio with afternoon light streaming through windows behind her. She wore the blue cardigan he'd given her for Christmas 2 years ago, her dark hair pulled back the way she did when concentration demanded it. Her expression carried the weight of someone who'd made peace with difficult truths. Garrett, if you're watching this, I'm dead. I'm sorry I kept you in the dark, but I couldn't risk your career, your life, our family. The directness of it, no preamble, no softening, was pure Claire. She explained Pine Valley's origins as legitimate therapy, how Captain Cross had recognized opportunity in isolation and vulnerable populations. How he'd built a distribution network using traumatized veterans as couriers, their military training and psychological damage making them perfect assets. The therapy dogs originally meant to help these men heal had been repurposed as living drug detectors trained to identify rival products and protect shipments with the same intensity they'd once guarded soldiers in combat zones. Then Claire's face shifted, grief and determination mixing. Dalton Hayes was a Marine Force Recon 3 tours in Afghanistan. Severe PTSD. Ghost was assigned as his therapy dog, and they made remarkable progress until Dalton discovered what was really happening. He found evidence that vets were being coerced into distribution. Their trauma exploited their loyalty, weaponized. When he threatened to go to federal authorities, Cross ordered him eliminated. The screen showed Claire leaning forward, urgency sharpening her features. I found Ghost in a drainage ditch behind Pine Valley, gunshot wound in her flank, beaten nearly to death. She'd escaped whoever was supposed to kill her. I brought her here to Eleanor, then moved her to the cabin after I bought it with Kate to stay off official records. Ghost is trained in voice discrimination. Garrett, she can identify specific individuals by their vocal patterns, recognize attackers regardless of disguise. That's why they want her destroyed. She's evidence that can't be discredited or intimidated. Claire's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. I've documented everything. 14 officers involved, 7 Pine Valley staff members. Contact FBI Special Agent Catherine Brennan, Public Corruption Division. She's the only person outside this I trust completely. The image shifted as Claire stood, moved closer to the camera. Tell Ivy I love her more than the stars. Tell her Mommy was trying to make the world safer for her. And Garrett, her voice cracked for the first time, you've always fought for justice even when it cost you. Now I need you to fight for me. Finish what I started. Make them answer for all of it." The video ended freezing on Claire's face caught mid-breath, and Garrett realized tears were streaming down his cheeks unchecked. Ivy sobbed quietly beside him, her small body shaking with the force of grief renewed and transformed. Eleanor handed them tissues without comment, her own eyes red-rimmed. For several minutes, none of them spoke. The only sound was Ivy's ragged breathing and the old building settling around them like a held breath releasing. Garrett wiped his face with rough, angry swipes. His wife had been murdered, not killed in an accident, but executed because she'd gotten too close to exposing corruption that reached the highest levels of Denver PD. The brake failure that Highway Patrol had ruled mechanical defect was sabotage, probably simple and effective. Cut the line, wait for her to hit a long downhill stretch, let physics do the rest. Clean, deniable, exactly the kind of hit Sterling would arrange under Cross's orders. Black SUV outside. Eleanor's voice cut through his spiral, sharp with alarm. She'd moved to the window, peering through a gap in the blinds. Two men, not locals. Government plates. Garrett was on his feet instantly, cop instincts overriding everything else. He pulled Ivy behind the nearest shelf stack while Eleanor maintained her position at the window. They're just sitting there, watching the store. How long? Garrett's mind raced through tactical options, most of them bad. If Cross had people in Pine Ridge already, the net was tighter than he'd realized. Eleanor checked her watch, 10 minutes, maybe 12. One of them's been on his phone the whole time. Garrett cursed under his breath. Phone meant coordination, meant backup. Potentially en route meant their window for escape was closing fast. Eleanor moved with surprising speed, retrieving keys from a drawer beneath the register. My truck's in the back alley, blue Ford F-250. Tank's full, keys under the driver's seat. She pressed a second key into his palm. This one smaller and older, storage cellar at your cabin. Claire stocked it with supplies for exactly this situation. There's an escape tunnel. She showed me the plans before. Before they killed her, Garrett finished, silently. Eleanor's expression confirmed it. Take Ivy and go. Now. Eleanor was already moving toward the front of the store, clearly planning to intercept whoever was in that SUV. Garrett grabbed her arm. They'll know you helped us. The old woman's face hardened with resolve that had outlasted 3 husbands and buried 2 sons. I've lived 83 years in these mountains, Mr. Ashford. I'm not afraid of thugs in cheap suits. Besides, her eyes met his with fierce clarity. Claire was the daughter I never had. I owe her this much. They slipped out the back door into an alley that smelled of old snow and motor oil. Eleanor's Ford sat exactly where promised, substantial and anonymous, among the service vehicles. Garrett buckled Ivy and tucked Ranger back into her coat and pulled out carefully, headlights off, using the alley's length to gain distance before turning onto a side street that paralleled Main. In the rearview mirror, he watched 2 men in dark suits enter Eleanor's store. His gut twisted with guilt at leaving her, but dragging a child into a confrontation would be worse than useless. The drive back took longer than the descent had. Garrett used logging roads and fire access roads Eleanor had described, staying off the main highway, where roadblocks could materialize faster than he could detect them. Ivy sat silent, processing everything she'd seen and heard. Finally, her small voice broke the tension. Mommy was really brave, wasn't she? Garrett's throat constricted. The bravest person I've ever known. And now we're going to finish what she started. Together. They reached the cabin as afternoon shadows lengthened across the clearing. Ghost greeted them at the door, stronger already from rest and regular meals, her amber eyes assessing Garrett as if measuring whether he'd proved worthy of her trust. The puppies tumbled around Ivy's feet, their clumsy enthusiasm providing a moment of normalcy in circumstances that had shredded any pretense of ordinary life. Garrett found the cellar entrance exactly where Eleanor had indicated, hidden behind the cabin's north wall beneath a drift that looked natural but concealed metal doors set into the foundation. The key turned smoothly despite the cold, suggesting recent use. Claire had been here prepared. This anticipated the need for someone to follow her instructions. The stairs descended into darkness that smelled of earth and gun oil, and stored food, the particular scent of a prepared position. When Garrett reached the bottom and found the light switch, what illuminated made his breath catch. This wasn't storage, it was a bunker. One wall held weapons arranged with military precision, 3 rifles with scopes, 4 handguns of various calibers, ammunition boxes stacked and labeled a combat knife, in a tactical sheath, body armor in his size. Communications equipment occupied another wall, satellite phone, with encryption capability, radio scanner laptop hardwired to satellite internet that wouldn't depend on local infrastructure. Medical supplies that would stock a small emergency room, trauma kit, antibiotics, painkillers, surgical instruments still in sterile packaging, and food MREs, water filtration, sleeping bags rated for sub-zero temperatures enough to sustain 2 people for 6 months. But it was the electronic system that revealed the depth of Claire's preparation. A control panel labeled Distraction Protocol connected to speakers wired throughout the surrounding forest. Pre-recorded audio of police raids, FBI operations helicopter, sounds radio chatter, everything needed to create the illusion of a major law enforcement presence. Remote activation via a device small enough to pocket. Garrett stared at it, understanding, crystallizing. Claire had known they would come, had known that whoever killed her would eventually track the evidence to this cabin. She'd prepared to make a stand to defend what she'd discovered with whatever means necessary. A detailed topographical map of the region covered a third-wall escape routes marked in Claire's precise hand, tunnel systems, highlighted rally points indicated. Garrett traced the lines, committing them to memory, the way he'd memorized tactical diagrams during his academy days. One route led northeast through old mining tunnels. Another followed a creek bed that would hide tracks. A third, marked Last Resort, showed a passage directly beneath the cabin floor. Ivy descended the stairs carefully, eyes widening at the arsenal. Mommy really was a spy, wasn't she? Not exactly, but she prepared like one. Garrett lifted her to see the map. She wanted to protect you, sweetheart. Protect both of us. Everything here is insurance that we'd survive if things went wrong. The USB drive felt heavy in his jacket pocket, Claire's voice still echoing in his head. Make them answer for all of it. Ghost descended last, moving better than yesterday, but still favoring her injured leg. She explored the cellar with professional interest, nose working, clearly recognizing the space. She'd been here before with Claire, probably during the setup phase. When she reached the weapons wall, she sat at attention, a trained response Garrett recognized from canine demonstrations he'd witnessed. She knew what those rifles meant, understood on some level that this place represented readiness for conflict. The sound of vehicles approaching shattered the moment. Ghost's ears snapped forward, a low growl building in her chest. Garrett moved to the periscope. Claire had installed a simple mirror system that let someone below see the clearing above. 4 SUVs, black with government plates, rolling to a stop around the cabin in a formation that spoke of tactical training. 8 men emerged, all armed, all moving with the coordinated precision of a team that had done this before. A loudspeaker crackled to life. Garrett Ashford, this is Detective Vaughn Sterling, Denver PD. We know you're in there with the dog. Come out peacefully and we can resolve this. The voice carried across the clearing with amplified authority, and Garrett's stomach turned to ice. 6 years of partnership, of trust built through shared danger, and Vaughn had been playing him the entire time. Every case they'd closed, every criminal they'd arrested, all of it tainted by the knowledge that Sterling was running his own operation on the side. Ghost's reaction to Sterling's voice was immediate and visceral. Her entire body stiffened, hackles rising along her spine, lips pulling back to expose teeth in a snarl that had nothing to do with normal canine aggression. This was trained response, the voice discrimination Claire had described. Ghost recognized Sterling's vocal patterns from the attack on Dalton Hayes, from orders given and violence inflicted. Her reaction was evidence more reliable than any witness testimony, impossible to fake or coerce. Ivy saw it too. Ghost knows him, Daddy, from before. She heard him hurt people. Garrett nodded grimly, an idea forming. They want the dog because she can identify them. But that means we have evidence they can't destroy, can't intimidate, can't buy off. As long as Ghost lives, their voices convict them. He activated Claire's distraction protocol, watching the control panel light up as speakers throughout the forest came online. With a deep breath and a silent apology to his dead wife for putting her preparations to use, he pressed execute. The forest erupted with sound, FBI megaphones demanding surrender, helicopter rotors beating, air radio chatter, coordinating a multi-agency response. The effect was immediate and chaotic. Sterling's team scattered voices shouting over each other, FBI. How did they know we were here? Cross didn't mention federal involvement. 2 SUVs peeled out immediately, drivers unwilling to be caught in what they believed was a major operation. Sterling and 2 others remained scanning the tree line with weapons raised, clearly trying to locate the source of the sounds. But their formation had broken. Their confidence shaken. Garrett used those precious seconds to trigger the tunnel hatch, a section of floor that swung up on counterweighted hinges to reveal a passage descending into earth. Ghost take point. She understood instantly, disappearing into the darkness with the confidence of an animal that had run this route before. Ivy followed without hesitation, trust in her father, absolute. Garrett grabbed the go bag Claire had prepared, checked that the USB drive was secure in his inner pocket, and dropped into the tunnel as Sterling's voice echoed above. "It's a recording. Find the speakers, find Morrison." The tunnel was tighter than Garrett had hoped, forcing him to hunch as he followed Ghost's shadow through darkness, broken only by his flashlight. The passage ran for what felt like miles, but was probably closer to 800 meters, ending in a maintenance area that connected to Pine Valley's service infrastructure. They emerged into a garage that smelled of diesel and old concrete, exactly as Claire's map had indicated. A modified Jeep Wrangler sat ready, keys in the ignition tank full. She thought of everything. Garrett drove with lights off, navigating by moonlight, in memory toward the weakened section of fence Claire had marked on her map. Behind them, voices and searchlights converged on the cabin Sterling's team, realizing too late that their quarry had already slipped the net. The fence came up fast, 8 feet of chain link topped with razor wire imposing in the darkness. But the section Claire had identified showed subtle signs of tampering, links cut and rewoven just enough to maintain appearance while compromising strength. The Jeep hit it at precisely the angle and speed Claire's notes had specified. Metal screamed and gave way, the vehicle punching through into forest beyond as alarms began wailing across Pine Valley. An ATV appeared in the side mirror, security racing to intercept, but Dalton's modifications to the Jeep included suspension that could handle terrain the smaller vehicles couldn't match. Garrett wove between trees' branches, scraping paint, undercarriage, grinding over rocks and logs. Behind them, one ATV overcorrected around a boulder and slammed into a pine trunk with a crunch of metal and fiberglass. The second persisted, driver skilled and determined, closing the gap. Garrett took a hairpin turn around a natural outcropping, physics and luck combining to keep the Jeep upright. The ATV behind them didn't have the mass to compensate. It clipped the rock face and tumbled the driver, ejecting into a snowbank as his vehicle cartwheeled into darkness. Clear for the moment, but smoke poured from the Jeep's hood where the fence impact had cracked the radiator. The temperature gauge climbed into red territory, 10 miles maybe before the engine seized completely. They made it 7 before the motor locked with a terminal grinding sound. Garrett coasted to a stop in a narrow valley, steam pouring from under the hood. 25 miles still separated them from the ranger station where Agent Catherine Brennan had agreed to meet. On foot in February with an injured dog and a 10-year-old child, that distance might as well have been 1,000. But stopping meant capture, and capture meant everything Claire had died for would be buried along with the 3 of them. He pulled emergency supplies from the Jeep's cargo area, food, water, medical kit, thermal blankets, road flares. Ghost's injury had reopened during the escape, fresh blood seeping through her bandages. The puppies whimpered in Ivy's backpack, sensing distress. Temperature was dropping fast toward what Garrett's experience suggested would be minus 20 degrees by midnight. They had to keep moving, had to generate heat through exertion, or hypothermia would claim them before Sterling's teams could. The march began with Garrett pulling a makeshift sled, the Jeep's cargo liner loaded with Ghost and essential supplies. Ivy walked between him and the knight's small legs, pumping to keep pace, breath coming in visible gasps. Dalton's GPS coordinates for the ranger station guided them northeast through terrain that seemed designed to kill the unprepared. Every 20 minutes, they stopped to check extremities for frostbite, to sip water that threatened to freeze in their bottles, to keep blood moving before shutdown began. An hour and Ivy's lips had gone blue despite layered clothing. Garrett made the decision that exposure was preferable to losing his daughter. He lit an emergency flare. 5 minutes of blessed warmth as they huddled around chemical heat, knowing the light might draw exactly the kind of attention they were fleeing, but unable to watch Ivy fade. She pressed against him, shivering. "Is it worth it, Daddy, all this pain?" His answer came from somewhere deeper than thought every second. Because the world doesn't belong to men like Cross and Sterling. It belongs to people brave enough to fight for what's right, even when fighting costs everything. Dawn was breaking over the ridgeline when the ranger station finally appeared below them, an old log structure, roof partially collapsed, windows empty of glass. Fresh tire tracks marked the snow around it. Multiple vehicles, and Garrett's instincts screamed warning before his conscious mind processed the details. The meeting had been set for Catherine Brennan alone. Those tracks showed 3, maybe 4 different vehicles. Something was wrong. They approached using tree cover, working their way to a position where Garrett could observe the interior through a broken window. What he saw confirmed his worst suspicions. Agent Brennan stood inside, professional in her FBI windbreaker, but her hands were bound behind her with zip ties. Captain Malcolm Cross stood to her left, expensive suit at odds with the derelict surroundings. Vaughn Sterling occupied the right, weapon drawn, and pointed casually at the floor. 2 additional men Garrett didn't recognize covered the exits. Cross's voice carried clearly through the broken walls. "Where's Ashford?" "He should have been here an hour ago." Brennan's response was sharp with anger. I don't know. I came alone like he asked. You used my communication to set this trap. How would I know his movements? Sterling's laugh held no humor. Captain thinks Morrison's predictable, that he won't abandon a federal agent even if it means walking into our setup. Cross nodded slowly. And Sterling's right. Our Boy Scout detective will come for you, Agent Brennan. And when he does, we'll have everything, the evidence, the bomb, and anyone who's seen what's on that USB drive. Garrett pulled back from the window, mind racing through options that all ended badly. Direct assault against four-armed men with superior position meant death. Retreating meant abandoning Brennan to whatever Cross had planned, which likely involved a shallow grave in these mountains. But approaching meant sacrificing the mission, handing over evidence that could bring down an entire network just to save one person, however innocent. Ghost made the decision for him. From their hiding spot, she could hear the voices inside the ranger station. And when Cross spoke again, discussing timeline and backup, Ghost's trained response activated with undeniable clarity. Her body went rigid, hackles rising, a low aggressive growl building in her chest. She recognized Cross's voice the same way she'd recognized Sterling's voice discrimination, doing exactly what Claire had described. The dog's reaction was evidence testimony that couldn't be cross-examined or intimidated. Dalton Hayes materialized from the trees like a ghost himself, moving with the silence of someone who'd survived Afghanistan by mastering stealth. He was gaunt, scarred, clearly in pain from the old gunshot wound Claire's video had mentioned, but his eyes held the focused intensity of a warrior who'd found purpose again. Ashford, his voice barely registered above the wind. Garrett nodded. Hayes gestured toward the ranger station. 3-on-1 odds inside if we take out the 2 exterior guards first. 4-on-2 if we coordinate. He carried a hunting rifle that had seen better days but appeared functional. You any good with that sidearm? Garrett checked his weapon. Good enough. Hayes smiled without warmth. Then let's go get our people back and end this. The plan formed in whispered fragments between 2 men who understood tactical reality without needing elaborate explanation. Dalton positioned himself on the ridge overlooking the ranger station's eastern approach rifle, braced against a fallen log that provided both stability and concealment. From there, he had clear line of sight through the broken window where Sterling stood, weapon dangling, with the casual arrogance of someone who believed victory was already assured. Garrett would circle to the rear entrance, using the collapsed section of roof as cover for his approach. Ghost would accompany him, not just for protection, but as living evidence, her trained responses, the proof that would survive even if they didn't. But it was Ivy who shifted the equation from desperate to possible. Before Garrett could voice the objection forming in his throat, she was already pulling free from his grip. I can help. I'm just a kid. They won't see me as a threat. The logic was sound, even as everything paternal in Garrett screamed against it. Dalton's eyes met his across the snow, a question passing between them that had no good answer. Finally, Garrett knelt to his daughter's level. You follow my exact signals. The instant I tell you to run, you run and don't look back. Understand? Her nod carried the weight of a soldier accepting orders, and Garrett's heart fractured, knowing she'd already learned lessons no child should need. They synchronized watches scavenged from the Jeep's glove compartment, agreeing on a 3-minute window from the moment Ivy revealed herself. Dalton chambered around with practiced economy, emotion. Marine Force Recon doesn't miss from this range. Just make sure you're not standing behind Sterling when I take the shot. Garrett checked his own weapon, counting rounds he hoped would be sufficient, knowing they probably wouldn't be. Ghost pressed against his leg, amber eyes reflecting pre-dawn light, some ancient compact between human and canine activating in her muscles. She knew what came next, the way she'd known in Afghanistan when patrols were about to turn violent. Ivy walked out of the tree line with her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest, a small figure in an oversized coat that made her look even younger than 10. The exterior guards spotted her immediately, at weapons coming up before recognition of her age made them hesitate. One spoke into a radio, "Boss, we got a kid approaching. Alone, looks lost." Through the broken window, Garrett watched Cross's head turn, calculation replacing surprise in less than a heartbeat. A child this far into wilderness wasn't coincidence, it was connected to Ashford, had to be. But Cross's mind worked in angles and leverage, and a child represented both. "Bring her inside." Cross's voice carried command that expected obedience. Sterling moved toward the door, and Garrett's finger tightened on his trigger, waiting for Dalton's shot, counting seconds that stretched into geological time. Ivy approached the entrance with trembling steps that weren't performance, her fear genuine enough that even Cross couldn't doubt it. "Please, my daddy's truck broke down. It's so cold. I don't know where we are." The vulnerability in her voice was real because the situation was real, only her courage was acting. Sterling reached for Ivy's arm, and she let the stuffed rabbit fall to the snow. The prearranged signal. Dalton's rifle spoke once, the report cracking across the valley like thunder compressed into a single syllable. Sterling's shoulder exploded in a spray of blood and bone fragments, his weapon clattering as he went down screaming. The exterior guards spun toward the sound, and Garrett was already moving Ghost, a blur of controlled aggression launching toward the rear entrance. He kicked the rotted door hard enough that hinges tore from the frame, bringing his weapon up as he entered FBI. Nobody move. Cross pivoted with reflexes honed by decades in tactical situations, his hand diving for the gun at his hip. Garrett released Ghost with a command refined by watching Claire's training videos on the USB drive. Ghost takes 70 pounds of military-trained German Shepherd, hit cross-center mass with enough force to drive him into the wall. His weapon discharged into the ceiling, raining splinters and old insulation, then flew from his grip as Ghost's jaws found his forearm and clamped down with pressure designed to immobilize without killing. Cross screamed, trying to shake her off, but Ghost had survived worse than one corrupt captain had endured bullets and beatings and still crawled half-dead through mountain wilderness to protect Dalton Hayes' legacy. Ivy was already moving, pulling a folding knife from her pocket, the one Garrett had given her with strict instructions to use only for emergencies. She cut Catherine Brennan's zip ties with hands that shook, but didn't fumble, the FBI agent's eyes widening with recognition and something close to disbelief. "Who the hell are you people?" Later, Brennan. Move. Ivy's voice carried Claire's authority, and the agent responded to it instinctively, diving for cover as one of the unknown men opened fire. Sterling, despite the shattered shoulder, managed to retrieve his backup weapon with his left hand. Training and desperation combined as he brought it up toward Garrett's back finger, already squeezing. Ivy saw it happening, saw the angle and trajectory, and understood with the terrible clarity of children forced to grow up too fast. The rock she threw, fist-sized granite worn smooth by glacial melt, caught Sterling in the temple with enough force to snap his head sideways. He staggered, vision blurring, and Garrett was on him before consciousness could reassert itself. The tackle drove both men into furniture that collapsed under their combined weight, and then it became what violence always became when stripped of procedure and rules: brutal, ugly, personal. Garrett's fists found Sterling's face with methodical precision, each impact carrying 8 months of rage compressed into knuckles that split and bled. "You killed her." The words came out, strangled, barely human. "Claire trusted you." "We both did." Sterling's response emerged through broken teeth and bubbling blood. "She was in the way. Should have stayed home, played photographer, minded her own business." The admission catalyzed something beyond rage in Garrett, a cold clarity that recognized Sterling would kill again, given any chance, would rationalize it as necessary, would sleep soundly afterward, because men like him had amputated the parts of themselves that felt genuine remorse. Dalton appeared in the doorway, rifle trained on the remaining guards who'd wisely decided that discretion beat martyrdom. "On the floor now. Hands where I can see them. Spread your fingers." The commands came in the tone of someone who'd given them in Kandahar and Helmand, someone who'd survived by being faster and more ruthless than the enemy. The men complied, faces pressed to rotted wood, understanding that the gaunt figure holding the hunting rifle had killed better-trained opponents in worse conditions. Cross managed to dislodge Ghost by slamming her injured leg against the wall, hard enough that she yelped and released. He scrambled for the rifle, leaning against the window frame, fingers closing around wood and metal, swinging it toward where Ivy stood frozen. The geometry of the moment crystallized with terrible clarity. Cross would fire, Ivy would die, and everything Claire had fought for would collapse into meaningless sacrifice. But Dalton's voice cut through the calculation. "Going somewhere." Captain Cross froze, recognizing the voice before turning to confirm what his ears insisted was impossible. "Hayes, you're dead. We killed you." Dalton's smile held no warmth, just the bitter satisfaction of a man who'd survived his own execution. "You tried real hard. Problem is, Marines are difficult to kill when we've got something to live for. And I've been living for this moment, watching you realize that your careful plans are burning down around your corrupt soul. Now put down the rifle before I demonstrate what Marine Force recon snipers can do at close range." Cross let the weapon clatter to the floor, calculations racing behind eyes that had spent a career reading odds and coming out ahead. This wasn't over. Men with his connections, his resources, his institutional protection didn't go down for killing one inconvenient photographer. He'd quietly lawyer up call-in favors, maybe take a suspension or early retirement with full pension. The system protected its own, especially when its own had spent decades learning exactly which levers to pull and which backs to scratch. Garrett read the confidence in Cross's posture and felt fury surge fresh. "You think you're walking away from this? Think your badge protects you. Catherine Brennan had recovered her service weapon from where Cross had confiscated it, and her voice carried federal authority that cut through the testosterone and violence. Captain Malcolm Cross, you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, corruption under color of authority, kidnapping a federal officer, and about 6 other charges my assistant will enumerate when I get proper signal. The litany continued, each count another nail in a coffin Cross clearly didn't believe would hold him. Vaughn Sterling, you're similarly under arrest. Both of you have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise it because anything you say will absolutely be used against you. But it was Ghost who sealed the coffin irrevocably. Garrett played the audio recording he'd captured on his phone during the ambush. Cross's voice discussing how Ashford was predictable, Sterling's casual suggestion about killing Brennan if she proved useless. The dog's reaction was immediate and undeniable. Her entire body went rigid despite injuries that would have incapacitated lesser animals. Hackles rose along her spine in a ridge of aggression, lips pulled back from teeth that had drawn Cross's blood minutes earlier. The growl that emerged carried nothing of normal canine territoriality. This was trained response voice discrimination activated by acoustic patterns, her neurology recognized as threats. Dalton knelt beside Ghost, running his hand along her neck in a gesture that was both comfort and command. Easy, girl. I know. You remember their voices from when they tried to kill me, from when they gave the orders that put a bullet in your flank and a knife to your ear. But we've got them now. The testimony can wait for a proper courtroom. Ghost's growl subsided, but her focus remained laser-locked on Cross, on Sterling, on the men who'd destroyed Dalton's life and Claire's and tried to erase all evidence of their crimes behind a veneer of service and sacrifice. The satellite phone Brennan produced from her jacket allowed communication that Cross's people couldn't intercept or monitor. Within 90 minutes, 2 FBI helicopters descended into the valley, carrying tactical teams that secured the scene with professional efficiency that made the earlier violence seem almost quaint by comparison. Paramedics attended to Ghost first at Dalton's insistence, the shepherd receiving medical care that finally matched the caliber of her training. They treated Ivy's frostbite with gentle competence, wrapping fingers and toes in warming blankets while assuring Garrett the damage wasn't permanent. Sterling and Cross were loaded into separate aircraft, both handcuffed and silent. Sterling's shoulder professionally immobilized Cross's forearm, showing tooth marks that would scar. Agent Brennan's debrief lasted through the helicopter flight to Denver FBI headquarters. The USB drive passed from Garrett's hands to hers to a forensic analyst who handled it like a holy relic, which in some ways it was Claire's final testament, her voice speaking from beyond death to demand accounting. This is extraordinary documentation. Brennan scrolled through files on a secured laptop, her expression shifting from professional interest to genuine shock. 14 Denver PD officers, including a captain and 3 lieutenants. 7 Pine Valley staff members. Financial trails leading to 3 different cartels. Your wife built a RICO case that could dismantle this entire operation. But she died before she could deliver it. Garrett finished the words, still catching in his throat like broken glass. Brennan's eyes held sympathy tempered by professional necessity. She died, Mr. Ashford, but she ensured her work would survive her. That takes courage. Most people can't imagine. Now we finish what she started. We make sure every single person involved answers for their crimes. The legal machinery ground forward with the inexorable momentum of federal prosecution, backed by ironclad evidence. Cross and Sterling, both lawyered up within hours, expensive attorneys arriving with briefcases full of motions and objections that withered against the weight of Claire's documentation. 12 additional Denver PD officers were arrested over the following week, their homes searched, bank accounts, frozen careers, obliterated. Pine Valley Veterans Center fell under federal oversight, its legitimate therapy programs separated from the corruption that had metastasized through its administration. 1 year transformed everything. The anniversary of Claire's death arrived on a June morning, bright enough to hurt the kind of Colorado sunshine that made promises about renewal and second chances. Garrett stood in the federal courthouse wearing a suit he'd bought specifically for testimony, the kind of formal dress that acknowledged the gravity of what was about to happen. Beside him, Ivy had grown an inch taller, her silence now replaced by a voice that spoke with increasing confidence about the mother she'd lost and the justice they'd fought to achieve. The courtroom filled to capacity, every seat claimed by journalists, legal observers, families of veterans destroyed by Pine Valley's corruption, and cops who wanted to see one of their own face consequences. The defense attorney, expensive suit, practiced condescension, began his cross-examination of Garrett with confidence that would prove short-lived. Mr. Ashford, you claim this German Shepherd can identify my client by voice alone, despite having not seen Captain Cross for over a year. That seems rather extraordinary. Doesn't it strike you as convenient that this dog's supposed ability can't be independently verified? Garrett's response came flat and certain. I don't claim anything. I'll demonstrate. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd built her career on cutting through legal nonsense, nodded permission. Bring in the animal. Bailiffs opened the side door and Ghost entered, healthy now, weight restored, moving with the confidence of a working dog who understood her purpose. She wore an official service vest, documentation from 3 independent veterinary behaviorists confirming her training and certification. Dalton accompanied her, no longer gaunt, but carrying himself with the bearing of someone who'd reclaimed his life from people who tried to bury it. The demonstration was simple. Ghost sat at attention while Cross was instructed to speak, to deny the charges, to proclaim his innocence, to say anything that would produce the vocal patterns his larynx couldn't help but create. This is absurd. I'm a decorated officer being railroaded by a vendetta. The words had barely left his mouth when Ghost's reaction shut down every objection the defense had prepared. Her posture went rigid, focus narrowing to exclude everything except the source of that voice. The growl that emerged carried recognition that transcended normal canine response. This was trained behavior voice discrimination, doing exactly what years of canine development had designed it to do. The jury watched riveted as Ghost maintained her alert position. Amber eyes locked on Cross with intensity that made several jurors visibly uncomfortable. Dalton's testimony provided context. That's a trained response developed for identifying friendly versus hostile forces in combat zones. Ghost was trained to recognize specific voices, to remember them indefinitely, to alert on those patterns regardless of circumstance. She heard Captain Cross give the order to kill me. She heard Detective Sterling coordinate the actual attempt. Her neurology stores those patterns the way our memory stores faces. Dogs don't lie, Your Honor. They can't be bribed or intimidated. They just remember. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning verdicts that felt both inevitable and stunning in their finality. Guilty on all counts for Captain Malcolm Cross murder in the first degree, for Claire Ashford's death, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, corruption under color of authority, attempted murder of Dalton Hayes, and 18 other charges that would ensure he died in federal prison. Detective Vaughn Sterling received 20 years, eligible for parole in 12, if he demonstrated the kind of remorse that seemed biologically beyond his capacity. The 12 other officers received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years, their careers destroyed, pensions, forfeited, lives reduced to numbers in the federal correction system. Garrett sat through the verdict announcements with Ivy pressed against his side, her small hand gripping his with strength that contradicted her size. When the judge read the murder conviction and mandatory life sentence, something in Garrett's chest unclenched for the first time since that June evening when the highway patrol had knocked on their door. Ivy whispered through tears that streamed down her face, "Mommy can rest now. She doesn't have to keep fighting anymore." Garrett pulled her close, his own vision blurring with the weight of completion. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed with questions he didn't answer, cameras flashing against a sky so blue it seemed impossible that darkness had ever existed. The cabin had undergone its own transformation during those 12 months. Insurance money from Claire's death, bitter irony that her killers had unwittingly funded the reconstruction, paid for renovations that honored the structure's character while addressing decades of neglect. The new roof withstood mountain weather with professional-grade materials. Double-pane windows kept warmth inside through February cold. The chimney stood rebuilt stone by stone, its cracks sealed. Inside, the space glowed with honey-colored wood salvaged from an old barn, giving the walls texture that new lumber couldn't replicate. Claire's photographs covered every surface, her eye for composition, evident in images that captured the mountains in every season, portraits of veterans before corruption destroyed them, studies of Ghost and Dalton during therapy sessions when hope still seemed possible. Ivy's paintings joined them, technique improving under Eleanor's patient instruction, until her work demonstrated skill that made gallery owners from Denver inquire about commissions. She painted Ghost and the puppies with photographic precision. She painted the cabin during the siege distraction, protocol speakers rendering it almost mythic. She painted her mother as memory preferred alive, laughing whole. Ghost lived with them, permanently certified as Ivy's emotional support animal by therapists who recognized what the dog provided that their training couldn't replicate. The 3 puppies, Ranger Sage and Juniper, had grown into the promise their genetics suggested, all entering training programs for legitimate veterans therapy work under Dalton's supervision. He'd partnered with the reformed Pine Valley Center to build what Claire had believed possible before Cross corrupted it beyond recognition. Every veteran who found healing through those dogs carried forward a piece of Claire's mission, her death transformed into something that saved rather than merely destroyed. Eleanor visited most weekends, her truck loaded with art supplies and stories that filled gaps in the narrative Garrett hadn't known existed. She and Ivy would paint for hours, while Eleanor recalled Claire's final months, the determination that hardened as evidence accumulated, the fear she concealed behind professional competence, the absolute conviction that exposing truth mattered more than personal safety. Your wife understood something most people never learn. Eleanor's brush added delicate touches to a wildflower canvas one afternoon. That silence in the face of evil is itself a form of evil. She refused to be silent even when silence would have kept her alive. Garrett found purpose consulting with Catherine Brennan's public corruption unit, his decades of police experience now weaponized against the kind of cops who betrayed their oaths. Every investigation he contributed to was another piece of Claire's mission, completed another corrupt officer removed before they could do the damage Cross had achieved. It wasn't the adrenaline rush of working Denver homicide, but it satisfied something deeper, the sense that his skills served something beyond case clearance rates and department politics. The memorial service happened on the first anniversary of Claire's death, when mountain wildflowers bloomed in profusion and the air carried that particular clarity of early summer. A simple stone marker stood near the cabin where morning light would touch it first. Claire Ashford, 1985-2024, hero, mother, truth seeker. She fought for justice when others looked away. The gathering surprised Garrett with its size, veterans whose lives Claire had documented, reporters who'd covered the trial, FBI agents who'd built cases using her evidence, neighbors from Pine Ridge who'd known her in those final months when she lived between worlds. Ivy read a poem she'd written, voice carrying across the assembled crowd, with the clarity of someone who'd learned that words mattered because silence enabled evil. Mommy found the truth in places dark and deep, save ghost, when others chose to turn away. She taught me courage isn't absence of our fears, but doing what is right despite the cost we pay. I'll be brave like you forever and always in every choice I make and every word I say. The final line broke something in Garrett's composure, tears he'd held through testimony and verdicts, finally overwhelming the walls he'd built. Dalton's hand found his shoulder, the kind of contact that acknowledged grief without trying to diminish it. Ghost lay at attention beside the memorial in guard position. The K9 stands for protecting something precious. She maintained it through the entire ceremony, amber eyes watching gathered humans with patient wisdom that transcended species. When the last person had paid respects and departed, Ghost remained until Garrett knelt to place fresh wildflowers against the stone. Thank you for not giving up, for bringing Dalton back to himself, for being the evidence that couldn't be destroyed. Claire would love knowing you're still protecting what she built. Evening found them in positions that had become ritual over 12 months. Garrett reading case files for Brennan's unit, Ivy completing homework, her teachers described as exceptional ghosts sprawled with her head resting on Ivy's lap, while Ranger Sage and Juniper tumbled in play that would develop into working discipline. Outside, June's sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold, and rose the same light that had illuminated Claire's last morning and now blessed their survival. Inside, peace had settled like snow accumulating through a long, quiet night. Ivy looked up from geometry homework, expression, thoughtful, Daddy. I think Mommy knows we finished her work, that the bad people can't hurt anyone else, that we're really okay now, finally. Garrett set down his file, giving her complete attention. That moments like this demanded, she knows, sweetheart. She's been with us since that night, making sure we didn't give up when things got darkest. I believe that with everything I am. Ghost's tail thumped once against the floor, a sound of contentment that needed no translation. The mission Claire had started was finished. The men who'd killed her were caged. The veterans they'd exploited were receiving genuine help. The corruption they'd built was dismantled. And here in a cabin purchased for the price most people spent on lunch, 3 humans and 4 dogs had constructed something that transcended trauma, a family forged in fire, tested by forces that would have shattered lesser bonds, and emerging with strength that only comes from refusing to surrender to darkness. The cabin cost Garrett Ashford $5, but the truth it revealed destroyed careers and ended lives and reshaped an entire city's understanding of what badges could hide. The family it built, strange, wounded, resilient, that was priceless beyond any currency humans invented to measure value. And as Garrett closed his eyes, listening to his daughter's breathing and Ghost's gentle snores and the mountain wind playing its eternal song, he understood that broken things could heal if you gave them safe harbor and refused to abandon them to the cold. Claire's final gift wasn't just the evidence or the justice or even the vindication. It was showing him that courage meant fighting for what mattered, even when fighting cost everything. And that love didn't end with death. It transformed into something that outlasted the people who tried to bury it.